All right, good morning. Today we find ourselves in Psalm 102. I know it's been some time since we've talked. It's been trying to close out the summer with some family activities and various things, so didn't really get around to doing a whole lot of in-depth study for this particular lesson. Did my own personal studies, but this kind of got set aside just for a little bit, just so we could finish up the summer strong and prepare for a whole new season. So today, Psalm 102, if you're just joining me for the first time, I encourage you to look back at some of the previous studies I've done. And as always, feel free to comment or say something to maybe recommend something. Recommend a study you'd like to see done or a topic you'd like to see covered. If not, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, and eventually we will finish this book of Psalms, this journey that we began quite some time ago. So Psalm 102, we're going to cover the first 11 verses. I am going to touch on verse 12 towards the end. That's just really a transition point to the second part of this particular psalm. This is a prayer of the afflicted when he is overwhelmed and poureth out his complaint before the Lord. That's the superscription. We don't have any identification of the author, time frame, circumstance, or any of that. But I think, as with previous psalms we've had that don't have a known author, I think it lends itself to the application for universal use in our lives. So it says, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. Hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thine ear unto me in the day when I call. Answer me speedily. For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as in hearth. My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread. By reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. I watch and am as a sparrow alone upon the housetop. Mine eyes reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me. For I have eaten ashes like bread, and mingled my drink with weeping. Because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. My days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass." So, again, this is a prayer of the afflicted. Again, this psalm, we're not given an author. It's, I think, considering its universality of use, it seems quite appropriate. It's something that I think a lot of us can relate to. Maybe not as in depth. This is a pretty desperate cry, but maybe some of us can. Maybe some of us have reached that point where it seems very familiar, these words in this particular psalm. But the first thing I want to establish is the use of the word complaint in the superscription. This is not intended to suggest a frivolous or shallow sense of whining or murmuring as we hear the word complaint usually. This is quite possibly the strongest use of the word to identify the depth of the cry of the author. This isn't some run-of-the-mill kind of like the Israelites, well, you gave us this manna stuff and now I'm tired of it and I want something else. This is a deep, heartfelt plea. And the word complaint here is just a dramatic representation of what that means. It's not used in the way that we commonly use it. Now, we must not be discouraged from approaching the Lord when such a deep sense of need is apparent, simply because it may seem like we're complaining. The Lord desires to hear us. The Lord is eager for us to come to him with our needs. Scripture teaches that from front to back. The opening statement is a deep plea for an audience with the Lord. The psalmist is in desperate need of the listening ear. He says, hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. This is a repetition. This is an intense kind of plea that he has. It's again reiterated in verse 2. It says, hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thine ear unto me in the day when I call. Answer me speedily. The psalmist uses verses 1 and 2 simply as an approach to make sure he's getting the Lord's attention. Hear my prayer. Let my cry come unto thee. Hide not thy face from me. Incline thy ear unto me. Answer me. So the psalmist is desperate. It's shown by his repetition. It's shown by the construction of these particular statements. Excuse me. And so he's already setting the foundation for how bad it is and how much he needs the Lord desperately. I have an itch that I can't get. Pardon me. So this only compounds the affliction. There is a sense that the affliction may be tolerable if only there was certainty of God's favor. Excuse me. I don't know if I was getting bit by something or what. In verse 3, it says, for my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. So something kind of interesting. It's totally unrelated. But in King James, it's King James English. So a lot of times we'll see words that begin with H with the word "an" in front of it. Obviously, that means because the H is generally silent in the English language. So reading the King James Version sometimes kind of it sounds interesting. And again, it's my particular favorite just because of the antiquity of it and the language that they use. You can use whatever translation you like, but that was off topic, but that's just something I wanted to point out. So verse 3 begins the because statements. Most of our Psalms have one of these. When it opens up with a prayer, it opens up with desperation, opens up with grief. There's usually a because. I'm here at your feet, Lord, because of this. And it says, for my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. The psalmist describes his days as being consumed as smoke. Very simple picture, gone with the wind, pardon the phrase, empty, lacking in substance, dissolved quickly, and of little value. Smoke, it's basically a byproduct of something being burned. So the substance is actually in let's say the logs. The substance is in the fireplace, and the smoke that comes out is basically nothing. I mean, it is, but it's not. It's the idea that you kind of get when you read some of the Proverbs or even Ecclesiastes, where life is just a puff, a vapor, a burst of wind, and it's gone. So the psalmist is kind of highlighting that idea. He considers himself consumed, of no consequence, and very of little substance, basically. The statement about life goes beyond even what King Solomon described as a vapor. This is, his bones are burned as an hearth. Fire consumes not just the wood or coals, but the oxygen, the moisture, and the life. The fire that is there, that is burning, is consuming everything around it. Everything that causes it to burn and everything that is there will be consumed and translated into smoke. And this psalmist feels this. I'm gonna use the word transformation, but it's not really particularly the best, but it's the only one I can come up with. But he's noticing this change. He's sensing this deterioration, if you will. The author is completely overwhelmed. And I think that sometimes we can relate to that. And it may not be as deep as this, or some may actually even be deeper than this. But for those of you who can relate to even this first couple of verses, I urge you to come back when we finish this psalm, because there's a great, wonderful promise that is given to us following all of this lament here. Now in verse 4, it says, "My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread." So we see more of a quite literal physical effect of his grief. Now, there appears to be two possibilities to this last phrase. He says, "I forget to eat my bread." Either he is overwhelmed so much that he has no appetite, or his prayer and plea is accompanied by fasting. Both can be true. Both are relevant. Both are applicable. Sometimes you are so consumed by grief or trouble or a burden or fear or whatever it is, that food really is the last thing on your mind, and you go without eating. In Old Testament times, and really we should be practicing this even today, where in the midst of prayer, fasting should be there also. So I don't see it being specifically addressed to which one of those it is, whether it's just slipping his mind because it's not important, or he's deliberately forgetting to eat bread because he is in fasting and because he is in such deep prayer and need. Regardless, it is obvious that the turmoil is extensive. The exhaustion of his burden has caused him to groan and cry in such a way that he is weak, and there seems to be no substance between his skin and his bones. This could also be because of his lack of eating, where his whole person is just diminishing, physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's just this crushing weight of a burden that he has here, which lends itself again to the previous verse, "For my days are consumed like smoke and my bones are burned as an hearth." All of this is a physical expression. It may be literal and or let's say metaphorical. I think it could quite possibly speak of his real health that's in question here. Now, verse 6 and 7 says, "I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. I watch and am as a sparrow alone upon the housetop." I don't know, in my particular view, if pelican was the right choice. Pelican, to me, seems to be more of a shoreline bird. I haven't really dug deep enough to know if that works. But the idea here is solitary birds. That it's supposed to be this picture of solitude. It's a solitary existence. You generally don't see these type of birds together, and so he's suggesting that he's alone. This is, again, gloom and wretchedness is really what this picture is supposed to portray. Now, in verse 8, "Mine enemies reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me." So to top it off, all of this physical things that he's dealing with in this first part is compounded by the fact that he's got people who are against him. This just expands his reasons for desperation, not only because of his health, but because of the detail of his enemies. So Horn wrote, "The scoffs and reproaches of men are generally added to the chastisement of God, or rather perhaps are a part, and sometimes the bitterest part of them." So what the psalmist is going to do that we see here is cast the blame for this particular situation on the Lord. A constant experience of mourning and ashes, weeping appear as common as food and drink. And that's actually, I'm going to go back to that for a second here. That's verse 9. Let me read that again. So it says, "For I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping." A lot of times when people are in grief, especially in the Old Testament and even into the New, it's accompanied by ashes and weeping. Job covered himself in ashes. This is this physical representation of a great burden, great grief, great sadness, whatever it is. And so it's so much that it's basically as common as eating and drinking. He's doing it so much. He's covered in so many ashes. He's maybe doing it repetitively so often because of this trouble that it may as well be as ordinary as eating and drinking. It's basically what the picture is supposed to be. Verse 10 says, "Because of thine indignation and thy wrath." So this is where he's kind of turning it and saying, I am here because of the Lord. The Lord is doing this. He says, "For thou hast lifted me up and cast me down." The psalmist relates all this mourning and grief to the hand of God, which would certainly add to the bitterness. My health is failing. I'm surrounded by enemies, and the very God that I serve is the one behind it, is kind of where he's going with this. He says, "Thou hast lifted me up and cast me down." Now, Spurgeon said he felt that God was treating him as wrestlers treat one another when a man deliberately lifts him up, his opponent, in order that he may give him the worst fall. So Spurgeon suggests that God is picking him up to raise him higher just to throw him down. It's more of to make the fall worse. But a very profound perspective, I think. Yet, however, one could also argue that the psalmist felt as if his treatment was unfair. As if to say, well, one day I'm lifted up, exalted, raised up, promoted, and blessed, and today I'm being brought down low. There could be a sense of, kind of roller coaster, if you will, with the Lord setting me up high today and then bringing me down tomorrow. I think, again, both are relatable to some degree in many of our lives. I think we can relate to feeling like the Lord has just thrown us down, as well as he's kind of, everything seems to be going well, and then kapoof. I think similar to the life of Joseph. Dad's treating him great. Dad has him a coat made, favor of everything. And then the Lord kind of goes, well, we're going to allow you to all this other stuff. And Joseph had this amazing journey throughout his life, and it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful, it's so deep. We did a brief kind of dive into it at one of our men's Bible studies and discussed just all the detail of the life of Joseph. Might be a good topic to cover on here. But it is that sense where everything seems to be okay, and then everything comes down. Joseph was second in command. He was like top of the heap, and then in prison for no reason. So I think we can all kind of relate to both possible applications of this particular statement. Trapp said this: He said, here to the 12th verse is a most lively picture of a dejected person, such as can hardly be paralleled. Verse 11 says, my days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass. If you've ever felt overwhelmed in anything like the psalmist, at any point in this first 11 verses, when we begin next time with verse 12, there is a great promise. It says, and I'm going to read it, but thou, O Lord, shalt endure forever, and thy remembrance unto all generations. The first part that I want to look at right now is the first four words, but thou, O Lord. You begin this lament, this cry, this plea for God to hear you, and then you give him all these reasons that you've come to him. But then what the psalmist shows us here is a deep confidence in who God is. It doesn't change the circumstances. It doesn't just make everything go away, and this is true for many of us. But somehow, just that statement alone can change the perspective of everything. So, verse 12 again begins with that, but thou, O Lord. Remember, our situations may be dark, seemingly hopeless, and may even be done by the Lord, or at the very least allowed by him. But if you are a child of God, you can rest assured that he is supremely interested in your good. Romans 8:28 is a deep promise to give us great hope for when we feel like this particular psalmist. I pray that you received something from this. Again, I urge you to come back when we finish this particular psalm. As always, like, subscribe, do all those things you do, and we will catch you next time. Thank you, and God bless.